Today, we're going to learn about how to use program mode on your camera to learn about exposure. Let's go. What's going on, everybody? Phil with Photo Gear Fun here. Today we're going to talk about how you can use program mode on your camera to learn about exposure. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. Please like this video, give it a thumbs up if you like it. We're going to talk a little bit about exposure, starting off with the exposure triangle. There are three basic things you can do to control your exposure. You can change your shutter speed, which controls how long the shutter actually stays open to let light in. You can change your aperture, which is basically, think of it as your eye's iris in the lens. So the lower the number, the more light is let in. Seems counterintuitive, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And you can also change your ISO or ISO, which is the sensitivity to light of your sensor. Think of it as maybe like a volume knob or a dimmer switch. You can control how sensitive that sensor is to light. So what I wanted to do is show you the differences between program mode and auto mode. I know a lot of people will start off in auto mode. So here I am in auto mode. You can see that there's an exposure selected. The shutter speed is 1/160th of a second. The aperture is f2, and the ISO is set to automatic. As I start to focus and take the picture, you can see that there's now an ISO value there, and none of these settings can be changed at this point. So the camera thinks that this is the best setting. Take the picture, and you can see that that captured at 1/160th. The aperture was f2. What we can do is change over to program mode. Auto mode, again, is fully automatic. You can't change any of those settings. Now, in program mode, things are a little bit different. Program mode will pick the settings it thinks is best based on a couple of things. One is your ISO setting, and you can see here my ISO is set to 1600. So if you change your ISO setting, let's say you want to make it more sensitive to light, program mode will choose different settings. Now you can see that it's 1/100th of a second, and the aperture is set to f2.8 at ISO 2500, which means that shutter is going to stay open for 1/100th of a second. f2.8 is your aperture, and that number changes things. And that's one of the things we like about program mode, is you have some control over the way your picture looks. And let's talk a little bit about that. So if I'm moving my dial here, which is something that program mode allows you to do. You can't do this in auto mode. So you can see the values are changing as I'm moving this dial. So I've got it set to f1.4, which is as wide as this lens will open, meaning it lets in the most light. And you can see this shutter speed now has changed to 1/400th of a second, which means that that shutter is going to stay open for less time because I opened up the aperture. And the effect that has on your picture is the lower that aperture, the more blurry the background is, or you'll get more bokeh, which means basically out of focus. So here's a shot taken at f1.4, and you can see, you look at the album cover, you can see that that's pretty blurry. So one thing that you can do, and the reason you might want to use program mode, is you can learn about exposure as you change these values. So you can see that we're 1/400th of a second at f1.4. Now you can see at f1.6, it's 1/320th of a second. So if you want to capture something that was fast moving, you want a fast shutter speed. So you would select, if you were shooting sports, you would select the highest shutter speed that you can based on these settings. And again, in program mode allows you to do that. In auto, it would just select what it thinks is the best. So this is something that you can do in program mode. One of the reasons you want to use this, and then you can learn about how aperture settings and shutter speeds affect your photograph. And you can see the light is roughly the same, or the exposure is roughly the same in these shots, meaning that the amount of light that's coming in is the same. And you can see as I change these values, the picture pretty much looks the same. So if you wanted to get a lot of things in focus, you could change your aperture setting, and you see these numbers are going up. That F number is your aperture number, and you can see as the aperture number goes up, the shutter speed stays open longer. So you're closing that aperture down, basically letting less light in. So your shutter has to stay open longer to allow more light to hit the sensor. And this would be good if you wanted to get something, again, in focus or a lot in focus. So here's a shot taken at f8. And now you'll notice that that album cover is more in focus. And the shutter stays open longer, so the longer you keep that shutter open, the greater the chance is that your picture is going to be blurry, because it's really hard to keep it unless you have it on a tripod. It's really hard to keep your hand steady for that period of time. Although it seems 1/13 of a second seems like a slow or fast amount of time, it's really not, if you think about trying to keep your hand steady for that length of time. So program mode allows you not only to be able to control how your picture looks, but you can use this to learn about aperture settings and their equivalents. So again, you can see at f7.1 it's 1/15 of a second, and as we open that aperture more, you can see the shutter speed becomes faster, which means it stays open for less time. So if you want to catch action again, you want to use as fast a shutter speed as possible. If you want a blurry background, you want that aperture value to be as low as possible. So again, if we go back to f1.4, you can see that that shutter speed jumps up to 1/320th or 1/400th of a second compared to what it was if we go back up, let's say, to f8. You can see that's 1/13th of a second. So that's the way that you can probably take better pictures on auto mode. Most people start out with auto mode, and that's fine. You can use auto mode. It still does a pretty good job. These cameras are pretty smart. If you want more control over how your picture looks, and you want to control certain aspects of it without going into, let's say, a full manual mode where you have to set all these settings by yourself, you can still let the camera select what it thinks is the best settings, and then just change your shutter speed or your aperture based on the way you want your picture to look. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Also, click that bell icon. That will allow you to be notified whenever we upload a new video or we go live. Get out there and have your photo gear fun. This is Phil with Photo Gear Fun. We'll see you again in the next video.